I want the minutes. Oh, good afternoon, Regent Pruitt. I want the minutes to show that at least since 2004, since I've been here, this is the first time we started at 9 o'clock. Secretary Radu, would you please call the roll?
Regent Baling. Regent Bradley.
Here.
Regent Drew. Regent Evers.
Here.
Regent Falvo.
Here.
Regent Farrell.
Here.
Regent Higgins.
Here.
Regent Rybar. Here. Regent Menedee.
Here.
Regent Milner.
Here.
Regent Mueller.
Here.
Regent Pointer.
Here.
Regent Pruitt.
Here.
Regent Roberts.
Here.
Regent Tyler.
Here.
Regent Vasquez.
Here.
Regent Walsh.
Here.
Regent Whitburn.
Here.
The quorum is present.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. The first order of business as your new president, I've been asked to remind you to please speak directly into the microphones so that everyone in the room can hear you. How'd I do? Before we get started today, it's my pleasure to officially welcome 3 new colleagues to our table. Regent Margaret Farrell of Pewaukee, Regent Janice Mueller of Madison, and Regent Drew Peterson of Verona. Welcome. Drew is back here. They're tag teaming. Mark and Drew are tag teaming for the next 2 days. I want to talk a little bit about our new regents. Regent Margaret Farrell is a former Lieutenant Governor of Wisconsin, former state legislator, and former president of the Elm Grove Village Board. She is the first woman in Wisconsin history to hold the office of Lieutenant Governor. Prior to her years of elected public service, Margaret served as a substitute teacher and real estate agent. Since leaving office, she has continued to be active in community and civic groups. Margaret earned her bachelor's degree from a little private university in Milwaukee named Marquette. Margaret, please.
Thank you very much. And I'm surprised to be here. If you told me 2 months ago I was going to be here, I'd say, really? But I was asked by the governor to serve, and I am absolutely delighted to be here. I have looked for many years from the other side of the viewing lens at the university. I have all sorts of relatives connected to graduate school and the university. If I have to earn any ribbons to make sure you all feel comfortable with me here. And I just really look forward to being serious about what the university system should be doing for Wisconsin. And by that I mean all the elements of the state that make it up, the taxpayers, the parents, the students, the faculty, the research, the business community. There's so much to be done, and this is such a great opportunity, so I look forward to being with all of you very much.
Regent Jan Mueller was appointed by the Wisconsin State Legislature in 1998 to serve as the state auditor within the Wisconsin Legislative Audit Bureau. She retired from that post in 2011 and was honored with a joint resolution of the legislature for her 35 years as a devoted public servant. I should note that Janice is also the first woman to be appointed state auditor. She has a long and distinguished career in finance, serving as a legislative fiscal analyst in the Legislative Fiscal Bureau. Very close friends of ours, the Legislative Fiscal Bureau. And as a program evaluation supervisor and executive assistant in the Legislative Audit Bureau prior to her time as state auditor. She has also served on the U.S. Comptroller's General Advisory Council on Government Auditing Standards, the National Fiscal Sustainability Task Force for the Government Accounting Standards Board, and the Advisory Board of the Accounting and Information Systems Department at UW-Madison School of Business. She earned her bachelor's degree from Central Michigan University with a political science major and a minor in English. Jen, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. If Regent Farrell is surprised to be here, imagine how I feel. I think it's somewhat of an unlikely appointment, but I too am very honored and humbled to be asked to serve as a Board of Regent. The university is such a strong institution. All of my career, I've been an objective, independent, nonpartisan public servant, and I certainly pledge to you all that I will continue to do so. And with regard to financial management, which is my particular area of expertise, I will work very hard with all of you to ensure that the system's financial management has an added element of openness and transparency and is very strong. So thank you. Everyone's been so welcoming, and I look forward to this journey.
And this, breaking news, Regent Drew Peterson was just elected president of Wisconsin Technical College System Board. Congratulations. Succeeding our colleague, Regent Mark Tyler, in that role. Drew is also vice president for external affairs and corporate communications for TDS Telecommunications Corporation, another industry that we're very close to. He directs the nationwide corporate communications, legislative, regulatory, public relations, and charitable giving operations for TDS and serves as chief corporate spokesman. He serves as trustee vice president for Big Brothers Big Sisters organization of Dane County, is an at-large director of the Madison Club, and also is a board member of the United Way Vision Council. He received his Master's of Business Administration from UW-Madison and a Bachelor of Arts degree from Ripon College. Drew will be taking over for Mark Tyler beginning this afternoon. Drew, please. Welcome.
Well, good morning, and thank you very much for the introduction, Regent Falbo. It's an honor to be with all of you today. I know many of you, but in this capacity, I feel to some extent that I'm following quite a leader in Mark Tyler. He is truly an evangelist for vocational and workforce development issues. He's done yeoman's work on the Technical College Board for us and really, I think, improved the brand and reputation of technical college education in the state. Now more than ever, the importance for us to work collaboratively is paramount, and so I look forward to doing that with all of you and joining the board later today. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew. Welcome aboard to all three. I know I speak for my colleagues in saying we look forward to working with you and getting to know you better in the time ahead. Looking at our agenda today, it would appear that we're breaking you in very gently. I'm sure you don't believe that, neither do I after saying it. But welcome. President Riley, would you care to introduce a new Chancellor colleague?
I would, President Falbo. Thank you. And good morning, everybody. Good to see you today. It's my pleasure this morning to welcome Chancellor Jim Schmidt, who's just taken the helm at UW-Eau Claire. Prior to joining the Blue Gold campus, Jim served as Vice President for University Advancement at Winona State University across the river and as Executive Director of the Winona State Foundation. He holds a doctorate in educational policy and administration from the University of Minnesota, a master's degree in business administration from the University of St. Thomas in the Twin Cities, and a bachelor's degree in political science from Winona State. It sounds like a lot of years in Minnesota. It is, and we'll try not to hold that against you, Jim. Welcome to the Badger State, and welcome aboard and all success in your chancellorship. I wanted to mention, too, Regent Falbo, that today and tomorrow will be the final meeting for David Ward, the interim chancellor at UW-Madison. We'll be recognizing his yeoman service later today at Brittingham House, but I'll just say here and now that it's been our privilege to have you as a colleague again, David. And remember that all great dramas have to have at least 3 acts. So thank you for your extraordinary devotion to UW-Madison, to the UW system, and I'd like to call the Regent's attention to the certificate of commendation for Chancellor Ward that is in your folders this morning. So with that, I'll turn it back over to President Falbo.
Thank you, President Riley. And Chancellor Ford, I think you know when you become a short timer, it's in the dress code. Next on the agenda is an update of the 2013-15 biennial budget. At our last meeting, we heard about the actions taken by the legislature's Joint Committee on Finance. Since then, both houses of the legislature acted on the budget, and Governor Walker signed the budget bill on June 26th after making some partial vetoes. Senior Vice President Miller will present a brief overview of these changes and how this biennial budget will affect our UW system institutions. David?
Thank you, Regent President Falvo. Good morning, everyone. This will be brief because there are a few changes to what we presented in June at the Milwaukee meeting, but I think I have a PowerPoint to come up. Thank you. We'll touch on several items. We purposely separated this discussion with the awards from the annual budget discussion. And this is all biennial math and biennial information. The later annual budget will be limited to just 13-14. This is information that you saw in June, and you'll recall a grand total number of $202 million that over the biennium we have to either lapse or absorb as a base ongoing cut. Part of that are one-time funding for new initiatives that go away. Part of that is the transfer of one-time funds in just 13-14 to HEAB. But about $62 million of that $202 million is an ongoing base reduction every year in the future. Since we met, the vetoes have been enacted, and several of them affect the university. These are the highlights of just the major ones. First of all, the budget allowed the continuation of previously approved differential tuition increases. The veto freezes all differential tuitions at the last year's amount, the 2012 amount. The legislative budget froze the allocable portion of segregated fees. The governor's veto unfroze that. So the schedule we'll talk about in the annual budget includes previously approved by students and planned increases in segregated fees per the veto. And the much talked about Wisconsin Center for Investigative Journalism was vetoed, but the governor requests that the board, and we will do this in cooperation with you and present it back to you, develop a clear policy about use of facilities for other affiliated groups, which we do have, but I think they wanted some clarification about how those are used. The Joint Committee on Employment Relations also met since we last met in June and enacted a 1% statewide pay plan. So it's a base increase in all agencies, statewide funding for pay plan by 1%. However, as you know, university pay plan always carries a tuition component. And since we are not collecting new tuition revenue this biennium, that normal tuition component has to be reallocated from base resources, and this also contributes to an ongoing commitment as well. The biennial amounts are shown here, totaling just over $47 million. We'll talk about the annual and ongoing in a moment. Finally, in capital budget and real estate, there were several vetoes. First is favorable because it allows the Department of Administration's secretary to administer the legislative $250 million reduction. The reason I say this is favorable is because we can work with the department on staging projects, and the Building Commission doesn't have to actually cut a project early, and we can manage this as we go through the biennium. Secondly, the veto maintained the Building Commission. The veto didn't maintain this. It just, the legislative changes to the governor's budget stayed in the budget that provide oversight by the Joint Committee on Finance of any sale of state-owned property. However, there was a veto that affected this. The legislative budget required that the proceeds, net proceeds from the sale of any property, go to pay debt of a similar appropriation or the same appropriation. The veto goes back to the governor's original budget and allows the net proceeds of the sale of any property to be used to retire any debt, so not necessarily related to the asset that was sold. Notwithstanding that, I actually remain unconcerned about some property grab across university properties. This is really about trying to divest of surplus property. And we work with the department and the legislature continuously, and if we have surplus property, we try to take the initiative and liquidate it. Our property is very heavily utilized for research and our critical mission. I would say that with the exception of the heating plants, I think that remains a live issue in the legislature and the administration to look at the potential of privatizing the operation or the plants themselves. So that is the biennial budget wrap-up. If you have any questions about those changes, I'd be happy to.
Any questions?
Regent Whitburn.
Are we going to attempt to set up a relationship with the DOA so we have early warning on any initiative that they might have in mind with regard to any of our real estate, et cetera?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We meet with them regularly, and I think that we would have an opportunity to have conversations about it. As I said, they're really looking at underutilized and surplus property. And previously, the budget errata clarified some language about what they want us to report. They really only want us to report on property that we determine is surplus. So, Regent Bradley.
David, if I was just listening to the news, I would have heard that we've got $600 million or so in cash reserves, and I see that we've got cuts of $200 million, so we're still $400 million to the good, right?
I have information in the annual budget presentation that is going to look at 3 years of reserves. So can I comment then? We're going to look at 12, what we know, 13, and a 14 projection. If I can hold that till then. Thank you, Regent Bradley.
David?
David, I understand that we don't know of any plans other than surplus assets, but the simple fact is there's now a vehicle and a platform for the investment bankers of the world to come in and securitize our parking and our athletic facilities. It can happen, but good minds will look at it hard, and will hopefully be part of the dialogue. Are you familiar with any examples throughout the country where this has happened, and what have been the results, good and bad?
Yes. I can tell you about Ohio State. Their board, not the state, their board chose to privatize their entire parking operation, which was significant. It was a significant capital gain at the sale, but because it's privately operated, and I apologize, but this is anecdotal from colleagues that I know there, that they find the operation quite difficult for the users because they're not able, the university itself is not able to respond to their own personnel. You know, it's the third-party operator that's responsive. That same entity was interested in looking at UW-Madison. We looked at our operational pro forma and found that it's quite efficient. And I know of heating plant sales that have taken place in Minnesota with reported mixed results. And let me be careful, those are not scientific results. These are anecdotal from colleagues around the country. But it is a growing interest. Private housing that is on the periphery of campuses is a growing industry that generally occurs where institutions, where boards don't have access to capital. They don't have state borrowing that is what we have as program revenue borrowing that is generally accessible. And they're looking for capital, and rather than the board issue debt, they will finance these through private entities and have them run in sort of a partnership. Partnerships, as you know, are very hard for us to do here due to the constitutional provisions.
Any other questions? President Riley, you had some
Yes,
comments?
I did. Thank you, Mike. As you heard from Senior Vice President Miller, the legislature did approve a 1% pay plan for all state and UW employees as part of the larger biennial budget, and that news of a broad state pay plan for faculty and academic staff and classified staff is welcome news indeed after 4 years without one. David's slide focused on the unfunded portion of that pay plan and the challenges that may create for our institutions. Even as we grapple with those budgetary realities, I hope that we'll remember last month's Regents discussion and the pressing need to address a widening gap between what UW employees earn and what their peers at competing universities and colleges earn. As I said, the 1% pay plan is welcomed and appreciated indeed, but it will not narrow that gap, and it will not adequately address the threat to academic quality and the state's overall success in a knowledge economy posed by uncompetitive university salaries. Just yesterday, we saw this issue get national attention as Inside Higher Ed, this is a daily electronic newsletter, published a detailed story about UW-Stevens Point and the difficulties that Chancellor Patterson and his colleagues face when trying to fill vacant faculty positions. The article cited information about UW's system's overall 18% average pay gap, but provided more specific information about the situation at UWSP, where, quote, I'm quoting the article now, 43% of faculty employment offers were rejected by the first choice candidate during the 2011 academic year. When Stevens Point asked candidates why they turned it down, 32% said other universities had matched or exceeded the offer. The same article noted that nearly 9 out of 10 UWSP faculty members are paid less than the national average by discipline and rank for master's degree granting institutions. Of that 90%, half are paid at least $10,000 below the national average. This Inside Higher Ed story is a painful example now out in the national higher ed media for all to see of our compensation problem that all of us, regents, the system, chancellors, elected officials, need to work together to change. If we recognize the competitive facts and their implications for the future of Wisconsin and work together on them, I know we can change them for the better, and I'm sure we will. Thank you, Regent Felber.
Thank you. We'll take a break from the budget discussions and remind ourselves of the outstanding work being done by the academic staff across the UW system. This morning we are honored to have with us some special guests, the recipients of the 2013 Regents Academic Staff Awards for Excellence. There are more than 14,000 academic staff throughout the UW system. It's the university's largest sector of employees. Many people will attest that they are the gears that turn the wheels of public higher education. To lead us in our awards presentation, let me turn things over to Regent Mark Tyler, Chair of the Awards Selection Committee. Mark.
Thank you, President Falvo. It's my privilege to help honor the accomplishments of our fine academic staff. Without these talented individuals, we would not achieve the level of educational excellence, service to students, and dedication to the community that have made and continue to make the UW system institutions among the nation's finest. The contributions of academic staff are invaluable to the strength and the quality of our mission throughout the UW system. That's true now more than ever in these times when we're asked to do more with less. The Regents Academic Staff Awards of Excellence are an important reminder of the efforts, dedication, and service by the winners that we recognize today and to their colleagues across all of our campuses. I'm pleased to say that the selection committee that I chaired faced a real challenge in selecting winners from this year's crop of nominations. It gives me a real sense of pride reading through the nominations and hearing about the great work that's happening throughout the entire system. Joining me in that selection process were Regent Tim Higgins and Regent Tracy Rybar. A great deal of hard work was turned in by all, and as we reviewed the excellent and inspiring field of candidates, I want to thank my colleagues for their hard work, time, and insights. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce this year's first award winner, Susan Green, an institutional planner in UW Stout's Office of Planning, Assessment, Research, and Quality. Susan impressed us with her passion for customer service, her creativity, and her many achievements. She serves as the main point of contact for graduate students seeking help with their thesis research, particularly with statistical analysis, survey design, sampling, data entry consultation, and online survey tool support. Under her leadership, the number of graduate student projects at UW Stout more than doubled during the last 3 years. Susan has also been key in helping students, faculty, and staff effectively access online survey software for various projects. Since 2009, more than 1,500 people on campus have received assistance. She has helped accomplish all of this through the use of her innovative and creative project management approach, which has won regional and national recognition. Carol Seaborn, professor and graduate program director at UW Stout, says about Susan, and I quote, "Her initiatives put in place standards for project management and guides to help students and faculty with statistical analysis have been extremely helpful and timely. Just by her presence, she has brought distinction to her unit and to the UW system." And I couldn't agree more. Please extend a welcome to our first Academic Staff Excellence Award winner, Susan Green of UW.
Regent Tyler. Thank you all very much. I am so deeply honored and appreciative of receiving this award. When thinking about what it takes to do my job and to do it well, the one thing that just kept coming back and back to my mind was that I really care. I care about helping people be successful in their projects, whether it's working with a graduate student on their thesis project, a faculty member on one of their personal research projects, or a staff member on campus who's working for a university-wide project. My primary goal is to help them be successful in what they need to do. And I want them to see and to know that they can be successful, that they themselves can accomplish the project. I'm there to help them along the way, but at the end of the day, it's their accomplishment. And that's really important to me. And the other thing is, unlikely as it might seem to them at the very beginning of our journey together, I want them to come out at the other end knowing that data analysis can actually be fun. I care about honoring the time and effort and the creativity that the people on campus put into their projects. There is some amazing work going on our campus, and I want to make sure that the support that I offer to them honors that aspect of their jobs. I really do feel privileged that they share their ideas and their research with me. It is something that I am very careful with. I care about providing them the best possible service that I can. And the primary way that happens for me is through professional development. I try to keep my skills up to date, both my skills in project management and in the statistical analysis part of it, through keeping up with the latest research, going to webinars, going to conferences, and through my awesome colleagues across campus, too, when I have questions. They're always there to support me. And the other thing is from my wonderful people that I work with in my office. We definitely follow the continuous improvement model, where we're always stopping and reflecting on what we're doing. Is the process in place working? What can we do to make it better? Are the services we're providing good? What can we do to make them better? And we're a very creative and innovative bunch, and whenever we come across something, it kind of brings the joy out of us to say, what can we do to make services better so that we can meet the growing demand but keep our standards high? So it's a very fun place to work with some very amazing people. I really, really love the work I do, and I'm very humbled by being recognized for it. I'm also very excited for the year ahead. So thank you all very much.
Our second individual award winner today works at UW-Whitewater, where she has shown enthusiasm, dedication, and leadership since 1992. We are recognizing a woman today whose concept of her role as an educator is as valuable as the results she achieves. Frida Briscoe is director of both the Minority Business Program and Minority Teacher Preparation Program. Ms. Briscoe approaches her work not just as a job, but also as a ministry. Her goal is to instill in her students the understanding that everyone deserves respect and that their education is about more than themselves. They have an obligation to give back to the community. Christine Clements, Dean of the College of Business and Economics, has described Frida's work as a labor of love and added, "Her steadfast example, unrelenting focus, and constant graciousness have taught us all the true meaning of inclusive excellence and helped us understand that it isn't something we do for others, but something we do for ourselves." In the teaching program, Frida works with more than 200 students each semester on advising professional development, finding internships, developing resumes, and providing opportunities to attend professional conferences. She is also involved in diversity recruitment. The Minority Business Program did much the same in UW-Whitewater Business College. In addition, Frida has also developed the university's award-winning Summer Business Institute program, which brings multicultural students who have been admitted to the university with an interest in business to campus for a week in the summer. There, these students live in the residence halls, take mini courses, meet faculty and staff, and visit a regional corporation. The impact of these programs is clear: increased grade point averages and enhanced retention and graduation rates for first-generation and underrepresented minority students. Frida told me that she is most proud of those graduates who are now working and making contributions to their communities. I am honored to be able to present our second Academic Staff Excellence Award to Frida Briscoe of UW-Whitewater.
Good morning. I'm extremely humbled to have been chosen as a recipient of one of the 2013 Board of Regents Academic Staff Excellence Awards. For this honor, I'd like to thank the Board of Regents, Regent Higgins for the kind introduction, President Riley, Chancellor Richard Telfer at UW-Whitewater, Provost Beverly Copper, Dean Christine Clements, and Associate Dean of the College of Business and Economics, Lois Smith, who's not able to be here today because the Dean is here. Also, I'd like to thank Denise Ellen, Chair of the Academic Staff Assembly, Academic Staff Assembly Member Kurt Weber, because had it not been for those two, I would not have applied. When they recommended that I apply for this award, I really didn't think that I should, because I thought that there would be others that would be more worthy of this award, and they twisted my arm, and so I thank them for doing that for me. Also, I'd like to thank Dr. Elizabeth Ogenshola, the Assistant to the Chancellor for Affirmative Action and Diversity at UW-Whitewater. Dr. Ogenshola and I started to work at the same time at UW-Whitewater. I was a counselor. She was the director in the EOP program, and she really inducted me into higher education and provided a really strong background for me to continue, and I appreciate that very much. I'd like to thank my team members, Han No and Kathy Maliner, part of the Minority Business and Teacher Preparation staff, and neither was able to be here today. Also, I'd like to thank Dr. Daniel Tefera from the Economics Department, former Dean Joseph Domich, and Assistant Vice Chancellor Roger Pulliam, Emeritus, for the many contributions that they've made to me that's helped me to accomplish some of the things that I've been able to. Also, I have to thank each of my colleagues throughout the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. When I think about what it takes to be an outstanding academic staff member, I came up with some things, and then yesterday I just had a whole nother kind of revelation in terms of a unique perspective that I'd like to share with you. From my perspective, one can only be outstanding if he or she is given the opportunity, support, and resources to be outstanding, as well as being surrounded by an outstanding cast of colleagues, with each realizing that it's all about each and every student who crosses our paths. An outstanding academic staff member hears from leadership over and over again that the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater can be a premier institution among regional and comprehensive colleges and universities, and an outstanding academic staff member believes in and is proud to be in and have a role in that quest. At UW-Whitewater, an outstanding academic staff member is given the flexibility and encouragement to be involved in coordination and implementation of faculty mentoring programs for underrepresented students and in student peer mentor programs. She's able to work collaboratively across campus with other retention programs and the Office of Career and Leadership Development to co-coordinate and implement diversity networking programs geared toward preparing students for internships, summer work experiences, and permanent job placement. She's allowed to advise a student organization through which students receive exposure to corporate America and successfully compete for significant scholarships. She's encouraged and provided the resources to bring together faculty, staff, and administrators in the College of Business and Economics to develop, plan, coordinate, and implement a summer business institute for incoming freshmen of color. An outstanding academic staff person has been provided an opportunity to recruit significant numbers of students of color and co-instruct and co-lead multiple travel abroad programs to West Africa, South Africa, and Brazil. An outstanding academic staff member is trusted and respected among students, faculty, and staff throughout the campus community, and she loves being a part of and having an impact upon that community. In summary, an outstanding academic staff member is trustworthy, dependable, and committed to institutional purposes and goals, and never, never forgets that students are why we are there. Is able to work collaboratively and is respected across all campus communities and constituencies, understands that no job function is too small or too large to be tackled, and is not limited by position title relative to helping students reach their potential. An outstanding academic staff member thanks you and will never forget this humbling and honorable award. Thank you very much.
In addition to the individual winner of these awards, each year we also recognize an outstanding program whose success is exemplary. This year's winner is the Distance Learning Center at UW-Platteville, better known on campus as UW-Platteville Online. UW-Platteville, which has been a pioneer in distance education for 35 years, created the Distance Learning Center in 2000, primarily to offer degree programs and services at the graduate and undergraduate level to meet the needs of non-traditional, place-bound students, typically working adults and families. The center offers rigorous programs in a flexible and cost-effective manner, and its growth has boomed. In 2000, its first year, there were 185 course registrations. By 2011-12, there were 2,900. As of 2012, more than 1,200 students have graduated from UW-Platteville distance education programs, more than half of whom live here in Wisconsin. After having success in engineering, project management, and criminal justice master's degree programs, in 2012, the center began enrolling students in 3 new master's programs: integrated supply chain management, organizational change leadership, and distance education leadership. The Distance Learning Center also provides training for faculty to create interactive courses and serves more than 150 on-campus and adjunct instructors annually. David Van Buren, Associate Vice Chancellor and Dean of the School of Graduate Studies, says that because the center has responded to the needs of business, public service, and professional fields, its graduates are highly competitive and fully prepared to hit the ground running. It is with great pride that I present this year's Academic Staff Excellence Award to the UW-Platteville Distance Learning Center, represented here today by Executive Director Dawn Drake. Congratulations.
I'd like to thank you all for the honor. Both humbled and grateful are the 2 words that come to mind as we received word about this. And I did ask a few of the leadership team at our office to come and be present for this award as well. So I'd like to introduce them now and thank them for the role that they played in this. First is Dan Avenarius, our Director of Operations for the Distance Learning Center. Christine Hawkinson, who is our Director of Communications. Amy Griswold, who is our Director of Advising. Karen Adams, who is our Director of Marketing and Recruitment, and Michelle Zazeta, who is our Director of Student Services. This truly is a team award, and we have 35-plus members back at our office who were wishing that they could be here today, but we will certainly be celebrating when we go back. You've heard about the purpose of the Distance Learning Center, and when we started not quite 15 years ago, there were really no policies or procedures in place, and whenever something would come up, the response that we got from the chancellor and the provost at the time were, well, we're not really sure how to make this happen. There aren't any rules right now, so just go ahead and do what you think makes sense. So that's what we did. We had lots of naysayers at the beginning. 15 years ago, online programs were not very common. And so we made a commitment at UW-Platteville at that time that we wanted to do online programs, not just courses, but complete degree programs for people who are in non-traditional situations. And we've remained true to that mission throughout our 15 years. Currently, we serve a lot of different types of students, all in non-traditional situations. Average age of the students that we work with is 36. We have about 17% students of color that are a part of our online programs. We have served students in all 50 states, all 72 counties in the state of Wisconsin, and 48 countries during that time frame. So our reach is very broad. We focus on continuous quality improvement on an ongoing basis. We've done that from day one, and there's every year comes around, we look and we say, okay, what do we need to improve upon this year, and what worked and what didn't work. We get feedback from students on an ongoing basis, and we use that information every single day to improve what we do and make sure that we're serving the needs of those students who are in non-traditional situations. I have the best staff in the world. I can say that and feel completely confident about it. It's a great group. Everybody is there for the same purpose, which is to support the students and the faculty to be successful in their process. A couple of other things that we're real proud of as we prepared for this award was we have received military-friendly school awards from GI Jobs magazine and the Military Advanced Education magazine. We do have about a third of our students who are either veterans and or active military or family members of active military individuals. We also have been recognized by GetEducated.com as the best value in online education in all of our programs. And we also have received the best online school in Wisconsin from Corporate Report Wisconsin for the last 3 years. So we're real proud of those things because what our focus is in getting those awards is that we are serving students, and that's really what our job is. A few comments that I would like to share with you from students that fill out evaluations or that contact us during graduation. And in many cases, the first time that the students ever set foot on campus is the day that they graduate. So we truly are a completely distanced environment. One of the first comments that we always hear is thanks for the opportunity. There's absolutely no way I could have finished my undergraduate degree or my master's degree if it wasn't for your institution. The second thing is that they were completely surprised at how interactive the courses were. They felt that they were going to not be interactive, that they were not going to feel a part of a course. We've had numerous students who have said, you can't hide in an online course. You can't sit in the back row and not answer questions. Everybody participates. And they were surprised at how much participation and the level of education that they got within their classes. That has been an ongoing comment that's made every year. They feel very connected to UW-Platteville. Even though they may never set foot on campus or the first time they do come to campus is at graduation, they feel a great connection to UW-Platteville. And in fact, we do have an alumni constituent chapter of distance education graduates. They do not belong to the individual colleges. They formed their own constituent chapter. And then they meet online or through phone to continue their operations. And then the last thing that many of them mentioned is that they received promotions and raises at work or were given other job opportunities at other locations because they were able to complete their degree and continue to do that while they were working. So what's the future hold? The future holds continued growth. We're looking at about another 50 to 60% enrollment growth over the next few years. We are beginning the process of reviewing additional programs and certificates that we want to be able to offer. We are going to be ramping up our grant writing opportunities and experiences over the next few years, obviously incorporating new technology, which is an ongoing situation. And one of the areas of focus that we want to bring in the next few years is to do more research in distance education. There's been a lot of work done in the past related to is online education as good as face-to-face, and there's been enough studies done with that. It shows, yes, it is as good and in some cases better than a face-to-face environment. So we want to do more research in other areas, and hopefully 4 or 5 years from now, when you hear about research, if somebody's wanting to ask a question about distance education, they will say UW-Platteville is the place that can answer that question for you. So again, thank you very much. We appreciate this, and we will cherish this a great deal.
Thank you, Regent Tyler and members of the committee for selecting such a strong slate of award winners. Now that we've been reminded of the important work being done by our staff and faculty members, we need to approve an operating budget for the fiscal year that began July 1st. So we will go into the presentation and discussion of UW System's 2013-14 annual operating budget and tuition. Normally, one of the biggest components of this action item is our decision on resident undergraduate tuition. The budget before you freezes that rate in keeping with the new statutory requirements. However, it does include new rates for auxiliary operations, including room and board rates. I'd like to draw your attention to your folders where you will find a revised tuition section for the annual budget document. Comparing these to the original materials, you'll notice that UW-Madison has deferred its recommendation to increase tuition for 4 of its professional degree programs. The revised tuition section reflects this request, and the board will not consider those increases at this time. UW-Madison's action will allow the board time to consider a broader tuition strategy and comprehensive plan that will provide a context for overall tuition decisions. We will look at professional school tuitions next year. At this time, I'd like to ask Senior Vice President Miller to return to the podium and lead this presentation.
Thank you again, Regent Falbo, and thank you, Regents, for an opportunity to have a full discussion of the annual budget and the impact of the gubernatorial and legislative changes on the operating budget for this coming year. So we'll begin with an overview that touches on the budget revisions and vetoes and how they impact the annual operating budget. One-time needs in this fiscal year, the GPR fee changes in this fiscal year, recommended tuition, auxiliary operations and other fees, and then finally, program revenue balances and policy requirements. The governor's veto, as I mentioned before, affected differential tuition, freezing that at 12-13 levels, and then the governor vetoed the freeze on the allocable fees, and the tables in your budget reflect the request from the students at the respective institutions. So what we're facing this biennium and this fiscal year in particular are $75.6 million in one-time cost. So these are things that we have to come up with dollars from existing resources to pay for this year. Some of them are ongoing, we'll get to in a moment. Some of these have ongoing amounts. For example, the UW Flexible Option has a 2014-15 amount of $1.3 million that you'll see next year that we'll have to reallocate for. But all of these are things that we have to come up with one-time dollars for to cover this fiscal year. Next are the ongoing reductions and unfunded costs. So we have a base budget reduction in each year of the biennium of $32.8 million. And then we have unfunded costs in this fiscal year of $15.3, nearly $4 million, related to compensation and costs to continue that would have been funded from tuition. So in the biennial budget, I mentioned that total biennial amount was $47 million. This is this year's share of that. So total ongoing reductions of $52 million that we have to cover. So collectively, we're looking at $127 million we have to cover from reallocation this fiscal year. The budget has a number of increases and decreases. Increases include GPR that is in the budget for salary and fringe costs, debt service, and compensation and fringe benefits. But there are decreases that I mentioned as well in the base budget reduction and unfunded compensation. And then there is new tuition dollars budgeted. And so when you look at this complex table that's A1 in your budget materials, a lot of columns and a whole lot of information about ups and downs by institution and by activity. But you'll see $41 million of tuition revenue that is not the result of any tuition increase. Rather, this is primarily differential activity that has not been budgeted to the base budget before. So it's activity from differentials that institutions have been collecting or expect to collect through the frozen differentials and now want to put that in their base budget and budget it permanently because they believe it is predictable and recurring. So we end up with what you see on Table A1. The net of all of that complexity of columns and by institution is about $57 million increase in GPR fee activity. What that looks like over the biennium in terms of percentages are about a 1.4% increase in GPR compared to last year at this time, the operating budget document, and about a 3.2% increase in fees for an overall increase of about 2.4%. Let me go back to this slide, because I'm sure you want to know, well, how is that $127 million that has to be reallocated being taken care of? You've heard about the system-wide balance that was part of the schedule of balances by institution, and it's merely coincidence that the closing end-of-year FY12 was $127 million. There's several strange coincidences like that around certain figures. Over FY12-13, that $127 million was drawn down with expenses paid on behalf of institutions, utilities, and so forth. And there are dollars held for future commitments as well in FY13-14. It left about $82.5 million of dollars available. And you'll recall this fund includes things like centrally held dollars for veterans remission, veterans tuition remission, and that's allocated to institutions specifically as needed. The proposal that we have made with the institutions is to distribute $75 million of that $82 million that's sort of left in the system-wide balance to institutions to cover part of this lapse and cut. And the institutions will cover the remainder. And there's a schedule in your budget of how that breaks out by institution, which is basically apportioned on the GPR fee percentage of the budget that they are. So I just wanted to come back to that and comment on how that will be managed this fiscal year. Regarding tuition, as Regent Falbo already mentioned, we have a true freeze this biennium on all resident and non-resident, undergraduate and graduate. So that is beyond the legislative requirement of only resident undergraduate. Regent Falbo also mentioned that the proposal for the 4 professional schools at UW-Madison is tabled for this fiscal year for review to bring back next fiscal year, not next biennium, just to be clear. And finally, one point that could be confusing is there's an existing differential at UW-Madison, the School of Engineering. The resolution reflects continuing that differential at the existing rate. So that's not a new differential. It's frozen, but the board has to actually act to continue it at the existing rate. The other funds in the budget that get into the 58% of the budget that is not GPR or academic fees increase about $38 million, which is a 1.1% change. It includes all the auxiliaries, gifts, grants, federal receipts, contracts, operating receipts, non-credit instruction, and trust funds. So everything in that blue box is about 58%, and you'll see that reflected in the resolution as well. More specifically to what you're being asked to approve today are rates related to the auxiliary operations and segregated fees. At the 4-year institutions, the average recommended seg fee increase is 3.4%, or about $36 for the fiscal year. At UW colleges, it's about $19 for the fiscal year, or 5.5%, and the average recommended room and board rate increase is about 3%, or $125. So, on to balances. You will probably recognize these numbers. I apologize for the jargon of fund balance numbers. It's important for all the accountants. Auxiliary operations collectively, all of those businesses that the universities run, dining, housing, parking, all of those collectively, and their operating budgets are Fund 128, and had an FY12 end-of-year balance of $184 million. You'll recall Fund 131, that is all academic tuition, was the $414 million carried forward from 12. That should be a familiar number. And then the other tuition is extension credit activities in a fund called 189 that takes place at all the institutions, had an ending fund balance of about $45 million. So those are the prior numbers. I'm focusing on these three funds because these are the three funds in the budget before you today. These are the three funds that your action today affect, and these are the three funds that the board actually has control of, input into, sets rates for, and so forth. The auxiliary operations, a reminder about the reporting we already have for that. All student fee-funded portion of auxiliaries is reported to the legislature annually at an amount that is above 15% of the prior year revenue. We file a report with the Department of Administration and the Joint Finance Committee that itemizes any amounts above 15% of those specific categories, and then details what the amount above 15% is planned to be used for. That is not, however, the entire Fund 128. That's only the student fee-funded portion of that overall operation. The cost of auxiliary operations is projected to grow about 2.1% over the biennium. A big part of that is because those businesses have to generate their share of the 1% pay plan that is not state funded. And finally, we'll see that the tuition fund balances will be drawn down over this fiscal year to help pay for the one-time costs. You may recall that the budget, the legislative budget, requires us to do significant reporting. Part of this will be taken up today in the Business, Finance, and Audit Committee, and then tomorrow at the full board, and that is the first step in a number of reports, new reports. We'll be reporting on the methodology we use to calculate balances and reserves for the UW system as a whole and institutions. So there's a proposal before you today about how to do that. We report that to the Joint Audit Committee by September 1st. By January 1st, we have to report several things to the Joint Finance Committee. Proposed limits and reports on all program revenue account balances, the proposed policies regarding the annual distribution of the GPR fee funds system-wide among the institutions. And it's important to note this is reporting a policy, not the results of the policy. So this isn't reporting the dollars that are allocated, and this is not an annual report. This is a one-time report on the policy that we will bring back to the board of how that is done. And then finally, policies on how, of the GPR fee pool that makes up the general program operation budget, how that is spent proportionally throughout the year. And that brings us to balances. Looking at the three funds that are critical to this budget, the university's operations, auxiliaries, we are estimating, and I can't pause and say enough about estimated, preliminary, unaudited, unreconciled every caveat I could throw at that, because we're pulling these numbers literally daily as updates are loaded into the system, and the books don't close till July 31st. And then we start auditing what's on the books on July 31st. So we are estimating that auxiliary operation end-of-year balance actually ended up about 196. That's up from 184 in 12. That the academic tuition pool, carry forward, ends up at about 534, up from the 414 of 12, and that the extension is up about $9 million from the 45. We also ask institutions to forward their plans to us. We normally don't collect their projections that they do for their fiscal year planning centrally, but we ask them to forward those plans to us and looked at where we would end up at the end of this fiscal year that we're entering. And you can see a significant planned drawdown of each of these funds, primarily in auxiliary operations, is projected to go down to a carry forward of about 114, academic tuition down to about 300, and extension down below the FY12 amount of about 40. As a percentage of the entire $2.4 billion GPR fee base, for example, that the tuition line is, it looked like the institutions were averaging about 21% or so of their base and their carry forward. So you can see a significant drawdown. We will be working throughout the fall on the reserve policy with you, determining whether or not some portion of these funds should be attributed to a true reserve, which we don't do now. These are not reserve funds. They're carry forward, end-of-year balances, just cash accounting. Whether or not there should be an actual reserve, which are funds that are not budgeted, but they're held as a contingency against unknown liabilities, and whether amount above that would then be considered a carry forward. We have to explore all that, and we're looking forward to doing that work and bringing a whole lot of clarity and transparency to the process. Oh, I just couldn't help. Get a building in there somewhere. Can't do a presentation without a building somewhere. So questions and discussion, and our senior budget officer, Frida Harris, is here with me to answer your detailed questions. Regent Bradley.
David, so we can compare apples to apples. When we read reports about how our reserves as a percentage compares with comparable systems, large institutions, when most other institutions or systems talk about their reserves, are they truly reserves as a contingency for unbudgeted items, as you just suggested we might consider going to?
Two comments. It's a very mixed bag, dependent upon the type of institution. A very preliminary look at other publics is on especially the tuition line or even the GPR tuition combined amount. They don't have reserves or policies. I mean, we've been told by external accounting firms that we're groundbreaking here in the country by their experience.
You mean we're groundbreaking in what
by setting these new policies.
Not what we have done.
Not what we have, no. That in establishing policies that we're now going to be doing, that most other publics don't have those kinds of policies. They operate with the carry forward and just roll that forward year to year. For those that have reserves, they're generally established by the requirements of the bond issuing agencies and the rating agencies, because they're boards or universities that are issuing debt, and they have to have reserves against those liabilities. And I also should recognize, in addition to Frida, Vice President Durkin here is, of course, who has been doing the primary work on reserve policy, along with Julie Gordon, Associate Vice President.
David?
And two questions. As to the reserves of those that borrow, I mean, we do have a charge against our budget
We
for
do.
the state's borrowing. So as a CPA or accountant, it's the same impact. You got to watch it. I mean, you both have the same expense.
Yeah, I completely agree, because while it's not on our books and it's not our technical liability, of course the state has never paid a penny of our program revenue borrowing, and we have complete liability.
And the state shouldn't.
Right.
We should pay it, but when people make an exception for the fact that we don't borrow, that's not true. We do borrow because we do pay. We're just not liable. My question is, give me some perspective and comparing the budget 2 years ago, which is, and I may have these figures wrong. I thought there was a $250 million cut in the lapse, and we had 2.5% increases, and we had to deal with that. I mean, that's a negative. Compare the two difficulties we have dealing with that one and this one, and what's changed.
Of the last biennium, it was a $250 million cut over the biennium, about proportional, and then on top of that, there was a $66 million biennial lapse that was largely managed through significant reductions in spending, holding positions vacant, and also generating some new revenue in that biennium as well through the tuition increase
$110 million.
and enrollment increases as well. In those particular years, we were still trending up enrollment a little bit. Also, what we've seen that is quite significant across the system is beginning 4 or 5 years ago with system administrative policies, the incentive for institutions to do more entrepreneurial activity and more aggressive enrollment. And those two things have generated significant revenue, and I think that's why we're seeing the balances we are. I think this fall, when we get final reports, this is obviously very preliminary, enrollment will be largely flat or slightly, very, very slightly down. You know, we're not seeing a continued trend upward, and I think we've been talking about that for quite some time related to high school graduation rates. So the institutions are quite concerned that past revenue earnings are not predictable or stable. In this budget, they're only requesting to move $41 million into base budget ongoing. What's really significant about this budget and this biennium is that $62 million ongoing annual base reduction. Previously, the largest ongoing base reduction we've had has actually been about $40 million. So this is even larger in real base reduction ongoing. And the reason is the $32 million, 33 is the base reduction, but we have obligations against the unearned tuition, and that's the other part of the 62. That's $29 million, and that's every year in perpetuity. That's the real problem that the institutions are facing, how to manage. We can manage the one time. It's how do you manage that permanently?
Can I follow up?
Yes.
Under another governor, Doyle, it was a 250, but we backfilled it with almost 34% of tuition. Is the difference here that obviously the base budget is ongoing? It's the freezing of tuition that makes it more difficult.
It really is, because that is a budget cut because there's 100% liability against that unearned tuition.
But the 1-2 years ago was a very difficult cut to get through, and we got through it.
Yes.
Okay. One time.
It was more one time. Yeah. Yes, Jim.
Thank you. Good morning, David. Just a couple of questions and observations. I think because we're comparing operating budget to operating budget, that's important and useful, and I thank you and your staff for pulling together this complex information. But what we don't have is the actual expenditure in any year. And And that will vary, of course, from the operating budget. So I think that's something in the future that I hope we can add. I'm very interested in working with my new colleagues to come up with a working group to try to better define and standardize some of these terms and even issues. I just think that would be very helpful because this is a lot of information to absorb in a very short amount of time. A couple of other things, if I may, Mr. President. I think the reason that the legislature, that I know so well, was confused about what is happening here is we've been spending time talking about absorbing budget cuts, but at the same time the budget cuts were happening, the carry-forward cash balances were increasing. That's just confusing, and I understand now from your discussion that those will begin to be depleted, but we still have a reserve year showing at the end of 13-14, yes. And then finally, you mentioned one of the tables, which is very important, especially for the chancellors in the room, which is table A1 in our original document. Every budget has winners and losers. A couple questions here. This document that I'm looking at, table A1, presupposed that there would be increases for graduate tuition. Now that's been taken off the table. What effect does that decision have on the bottom line in table A1?
It really doesn't, and here's why, and this is why you don't have a revised resolution in your packet for the tuition line. The total projected increased revenue, if those 4 schools had been increased, was about $2.8 million. That's on a base of Madison's tuition of about $470 million. I think that's about 0.6%. These are estimates. That $470 million base is a projected estimate, which fluctuates fairly throughout the year with non-resident enrollment, with the enrollment mix of graduate, so forth. So that's why we didn't, it's $2.8 million, but statistically, it's not material to the $470 million. That's why we didn't revise the number, and that's why it's not revised in this table.
Fiscal effect is negligible.
It's small, and can be offset by many, many other changes in the enrollment mix. Now, why it was so important to those schools is that tuition is siloed in those schools. That's a really important fact. Those particular schools aren't, my understanding is, aren't carrying significant balances forward to make up for this not approving their request. But they also won't receive tuition from anywhere else on campus either. And had they raised this, this would not have gone outside those schools. They're quite siloed.
Thank you. My final question goes back to that comment about winners and losers. When you look carefully at table A1, you see that most schools, despite everything that's happening, will see an increase in their spending authority, at least from these pots of money. But there are 6 schools that do not, notably Milwaukee, Eau Claire, Parkside, and so on. So some have an increase in spending authority and some have an actual reduction. For those who have an actual reduction, is that reduction offset by the other parts of the operating budget that we are not really discussing? That if you look at the resolution, it's the, I forget the percentage, it's the 58.8%. Are the spending cuts those institutions seeing, are they offset by increases in this other category in the resolution?
No.
No.
This is the GPR fee budget, not to be confused with the other 58%. That is all the other program operations that have to remain in the funds from which they're generated. So there's some very firm silos. We do not have an all money is green operational budget. housing is housing, parking is parking, program revenue is segregated. It is not, it has to be retained and used for its generated purpose. Similarly, it doesn't cross the other way. So this is just the GPR fee budget. And when we say that they have expenditure increases, the point I was trying to make earlier with the detail of the one-time money is that one-time $75 million to lapse this fiscal year is not in this table because it's one time and this is a base budget table.
So is that where these institutions whose expenditures are going up are getting funded out of the $75 million?
No, this is actual revenue that they're projecting out of their base. I'm just saying they don't have a true net gain of $59 million at the end of $57 million at the end of the day because they've got to absorb their share of this fiscal year's cut. So, Frida, would you like to add something?
There's just a couple of things that play into this table A1 that we were discussing by institution. When you're looking at it and you're seeing that there are some differences, and some of them are very sizable in the amounts of revenues that the institutions receive, some of them with ups and downs. There are two major factors that are playing into that. One is debt service and who has the increases in debt service. Another piece is the revenue that's in there from tuition targets and professional programs. Now, that revenue is there to support those programs and those the differential programs, the professional programs, whatever, that are at those institutions. So while they have an increase in funding, they need to use that increase in funding to pay for the salaries and other costs associated with the programs. So if you look at that, that's $41.5 million that really is not available to help out with a lot of the other things that we've been talking about. And then when you pull out the $31 million of debt service, which can't be used for anything except debt service. If it's not used, it goes back to the state, it can't be used to support anything else, then you really are looking at a decrease in the operational funding that they have to support the regular programs at the institutions.
And Regent Mueller, thank you for the other two questions. I'd like to comment briefly on those. I agree. So this is my fourth day on the job, and I agree with your assessment about how we need to transform the budget document, how information is presented, and what we presented today about looking forward to end-of-year balances was a very, very, very first preliminary step. And I want to thank all my colleagues at the institutions because we didn't give them very long to do that. I'm working very closely with Regent Chairman Whitburn and Regent President Falvo and Vice President Milner on these matters, and we're collaborating on how to get more clarity in the documents that is more business-like rather than more state budgeting-like. And, you know, we are a state agency, and we operate like a state agency, and we build budgets like a state agency. So, but I think there's a whole other layer of looking at projected prior year, end-of-year balance, revenue, expenses, new fund balance, that can be brought to bear here as we go forward in the next year. And then, of course, all the work we're doing on the reserve policies themselves. Secondly, you ask about the $64,000 question of this entire spring since April has been, how did those balances grow while you were taking a $250 million cut? How do you do that? It's a great question. And the answer is business managers do what they should. Facing cuts, they are conservative, and they spend a lot less, and they cut their expenses, and they hold positions vacant, and they reduce spending. Simultaneously, they were generating significant new revenue through non-traditional activity. And until the governor's budget came out in February, we were fully expecting that it might be another biennial of cuts and lapses. And so I think institutions were budgeting very conservatively for that. So I think there's several things that went together to create the fund balances that grew while they were taking some cuts. So, Regent Whitburn.
I might just take a second to summarize what has been going on in our Business, Finance, and Audit Committee as we prepared to deal with the assignments that the legislature has given us. David has made reference to them, but we've really had three key assignments. One will come to a head here with the board tomorrow. If, in fact, our committee and the full board is comfortable with answering the mail over at the legislature, which is due September 1st, on the question of methodologies. How do we go about tallying up these dollars in these various accounts that has drawn a lot of attention in the carry forward in fiscal 12? So staff working with CBOs and chancellors in the system have developed a proposed methodology that we're going to discuss this afternoon, and if there's comfort, we'll bring to the full board tomorrow. That methodology will then go to the Joint Audit Committee for their review and stamp. If they're comfortable, that will be in the done pile. Then we have several due bills over at the legislature January 1st. As David pointed out, and as we've found out, as Chuck and I have led a subset of our committee working with staff to reach outside the system, particularly to the National KPMG organization, who have been very, very active over an extended period of time in this space. Typically, large public systems do not have a formal carry-forward policy in place. So David made reference to this earlier. We have been directed by the legislature to put one in place. It needs to be done on or before January 1st. And it will be the hope, my hope, and David's hope, together with the staff, to bring a draft proposition hopefully as early as our October Regent meeting in Parkside. The other thing that the legislature is very interested in is in the distribution of the tuition student fee dollars as it comes together with the GPR dollars that go for this purpose. And we have to report to them also by January 1st on that subject. How is tuition distributed? Married up with GPR and expended throughout the year. And this will be a report that we will send. We won't have to send it every year, but they want to make sure they're comfortable. That'll go to both the Fiscal Bureau and Joint Finance, not the Joint Audit Committee. Any questions on what I've outlined? I hope it's helpful for people to understand the jobs that we have.
On the question of policies, and this is, we obviously, and I think Regent Whitburn has very carefully and eloquently articulated the assignments that we received from the legislature over the next 6 to 9 months, and those are important ones. I guess I wanted to maybe ask a question, maybe what would be more termed extra credit work that we might take on our own, and that is when we're talking about policies, I was struck by Chancellor Ward, who is now no longer in the room, but I was going to ask him to talk a little bit about, or at least I was interested in having the board at some point engage in this question that he raised, I think quite well in the last couple of weeks, about a long-term approach to tuition policy in the state of Wisconsin, and how we marry not only the whole issue of sort of setting tuition policy, but also marry it with the compelling need we have in this university to maintain educational quality and pay our faculty and staff competitively, and reflecting President Riley's comments. So I guess as we think about policy challenges and issues, both in this budget but also going forward, that was something that I wanted to at least make sure we had as part of that conversation in the days and weeks ahead.
It's interesting you mention that, because that was one of the recommendations of, I won't call it the Falbo Task Force anymore, but as Chancellor Ward named it, the Noah's Ark Committee. It was one of those recommendations to come up with a methodology for ongoing for tuition. And then I think with the advent of the attention in the fund balances and the reserves, and David, glad you're back, we need your help. It won't be the last time. That those policies somehow be blended together, so that we establish acceptable and appropriate reserve levels. We establish a methodology for how we set tuition, and that the two have a lot to do with each other. So, David, when Chuck started out, maybe you want to ask David directly.
David and I looked over there, and I thought Chancellor Encore had left a couple of weeks early. I was interested, and I know many of us on the board were interested in some of your observations about the need for a long-term approach to tuition policy in Wisconsin. And I just wondered if you might offer a comment or two as you see sort of the key 2 or 3 issues that ought to be a focus both of this board and of this university and of the state of Wisconsin over the coming year or two, as we go through a period, obviously, of a tuition freeze, but look longer term to the question of tuition policy.
So, the underlying problem of being here is the revenue crisis in higher education and the overall business model. So we have a revenue crisis. When I walked into Madison, the first reaction was we're 15% overstaffed in terms of the resources we had. And one of the things we did was just not hire people or replace retirements. So there's a revenue crisis. And the way you focus on that, there are really 3 issues. One of them is cost containment. The other one is technology and innovation, increased capacity and efficiency. And thirdly, make sure your price makes sense in relation to your competitors. The first 2, I think, can be done, and you could view them as self-help without, in a sense, just waiting around for another cash layout from the state. But if your price is $5,000 less than most of your competitors, Minnesota, Illinois, Iowa, Indiana, then you're trapped by using up all your innovation to just simply catch up with other people's price. So at some point, we have to decide how does the price fit in relation to the broader calculus of the cost of higher education in relation to other states with similar costs. And then, of course, if you could recalibrate, you can have low tuition increases. Our problem is that most of our increases are catch-up. I mean, even with the reciprocity with Minnesota, it's unimaginably complicated to have them charging in-state tuition at, was it $4,000 or something like that greater than we are. I mean, so at some point, we have to look at the Midwest. We have to look at the in-state, out-of-state balance and come to some conclusions that if you're going to have incentives for our campuses to do cost containment and innovate, they can't do that from a price that's dead last. And they certainly can't pay their faculty adequately and competitively if that's the case. So instead of looking at percentage increases on a base that's unrealistically set, it would be good for us to decide what is a fair price and then guarantee going forward very prudent increases in tuition. But to, in fact, have freezes on tuition levels that in relation to our competitors, are unrealistically non-competitive is a race to the bottom, as I've said several times. I understand this year, because of the balances,
it made a great deal of sense to tactically retreat and say that money should help the parent and the student pay their tuition this year. But going forward, that's one-time money. It will not resolve the structural dilemma of the tuition level of this system. So again, I think campuses will do cost containment, we will innovate, but if we're doing that in relation to a price which is unrealistically set in relation to our competitors, I don't know how we in effect compete effectively. So that's why we need a tuition policy. What is a fair and reasonable tuition policy as you look more broadly at the Big Ten or the competitors of our ASCII schools? The other issue is giving the public a better sense of the public versus the private responsibility for tuition. I came in 1960, paid 5% of my tuition, 95% came from the state. My granddaughter arrives in Madison in September. Her parents and a little contribution from me will pay 55%, and 45% will come from the state. That you could call demographic injustice. That is, today, my grandchildren are getting less of a public subsidy than I did. But that's natural, because obviously costs are different, the number of people who are middle class is different, and it's a completely different concept. It's now a shared responsibility to have public and private contributions to higher ed. When I came, it was seen as a public utility, almost a pure public utility. It's no longer an entitlement. But many middle-class folks, because they're stressed by the increase in tuition and don't understand why it is necessary, feel very angry about that and still see it as an entitlement. So there's been no explanation. My best way of explaining this is there's been no policy discussion about that. It's happened by water torture since about 1990. You know, just little bits and pieces of drops in state support, increases in tuition, but not rationally related. And I'll end by saying, in the country for which I once came, but which doesn't quite know whether I belong anymore because I'm hyper-American, as you know, when you look at the British parliamentary decision on undergraduate tuition in England in 2008, made by a left-of-centre government, they suddenly realized they could not afford to pay higher education costs as a pure public utility, 100% paid by the state. They had to decide what was the ratio of the family contribution and the state contribution, 45, 55, 25, 75, or 50-50. They came up with a cost of higher education that was somewhere around $15,000 to $20,000, depending on the quality of the institution and so on, or place in the country. It came to the conclusion it should be 50-50, about $9,000 to the family, £5,000, $9,000, towards the $18,000 estimated cost that came from the exchequer for an undergraduate education. They voted on that, and they came up with a figure of $9,000. The year before, it was zero. They went to $9,000. With the left-leaning government, that the private contribution would now be 50% of the cost of college. Everybody knew what the debate was about. Everybody knew it was $18,000 was the cost of on the average of a British undergraduate education, and that the fair way now was no longer an entitlement. It was a balanced commitment from the family that should start saving, or maybe take loans, or get grants if they're low income, and the rest would come from the state. This was a very rational public policy decision made in 1 year with a vote. More votes coming from Conservatives than from the Labour Party, who actually proposed it. We've never had that debate. We don't know where we are. We don't know what the cost of education is, nor do we know what the proportion should be. So we have these random sort of issues that come up every so often, where usually a crisis defines what you do, not some systemic policy discussion. I hope that kind of helps a bit.
I thought that was pretty good. Thank you, President.
You couldn't have said it better yourself. Other questions? John?
Yeah, I'd like to raise another random issue on tuition, and that's the decision to freeze undergraduate, non-resident tuition, particularly at UW-Madison, where it would seem, and without any data provided, but it would seem that there is not a shortage of out-of-state applicants to Madison, that those families generally are higher income, than in-state families. And I was just wondering what's the rationale between holding that, if there was any modeling done in terms of looking at what a tuition increase on out-of-state would do for Madison.
Yeah, I'm going to ask our tuition expert to comment, or someone from Madison.
Madison may want to add to this. As we were looking at what to do with tuition elsewhere, we are aware that non-resident undergraduate tuition at UW-Madison is below that of their peers. They have been having increases over the last few years for the Madison Initiative for undergraduate that were larger than the increases that they have had on the resident students. We had a conversation with UW-Madison to decide where they wanted to go with this. For our comprehensive institutions, it was an effort to look at, again, competitiveness and pricing to try to bring in more non-resident students, and you would have had to do a lot of remissions as well if you had had increases with that population. UW-Madison's response was at this point they preferred to leave the non-resident undergraduate the same with the freeze because it gives them opportunities in the future.
That's very fair. I think we saw undergraduates as the most challenged part of an education. We want people to get an undergraduate education. I'm open to some systemic increase, and I think my successor, Becky Blank, will probably, for the next biennium, want to provide evidence and reasons why we might want to increase it. This time, I felt we didn't have enough notice. I think there's a fairness principle of how much notice you give parents, and I felt this debate was coming along in April, May, and June, and we had not yet anticipated the freeze, that we had to rethink where we were going. So my view is, I think you're right. I think there is a plausible, fair reason to increase this, and such a proposal, I think, will come from my successor. More seriously, I think, is the professional school issue, where we are, it's just basically, we are so outpriced that it really is embarrassing. And I do believe that it would be good for us to have a more systemic view of all tuition, so that this professional school tuition just doesn't get looked at by itself, but we see it as part of a composite system. And that's why I think deferring where we wish to go this year allows you and others to perhaps have a more systematic view of this. I might add that the pressure for the professional school increases comes from their board of visitors, not necessarily from me or the deans. The boards of visitors are embarrassed that we're embarrassing ourselves by having bargain basement prices. They don't see any value in this. And they also point out that it is directly correlated with the salary levels of these various institutions. So I think this year we were more fixated on professional schools. We now recognize we need to look at that in more detail. And whenever you do something with tuition, it does seem to me you've got to give folks notice. Last-minute adjustments on tuition are just profoundly unfair to those who are having to pay. And that was my main reason in June for feeling the out-of-state tuition shouldn't be pushed at this time. And we were all distracted, obviously, by the balances in the undergraduate issue.
Other questions? Entertain a motion to approve Resolution 5.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Good discussion.
Regent President, if I could just make a closing comment about the work of the next year, this biennium. My personal goal, not to be mistaken for system policy or board policy, is to do all the work that we have to do that we've outlined here today to get back in a position where we can obtain the pay plan flexibility that was proposed by the governor in this budget, that was removed by the legislature, to get that back, and to also get back to the point of basically where the governor's budget was when he introduced it. And the philosophy there is stable, predictable, ongoing state funding that increases as fixed costs increase to keep us stable. Tuition predictable and moderate for growth and program growth and quality and financial aid. So that's my goal. Is I look at the next 2 years of things that we want to put ourselves in a position to be here when the next budget is introduced and achieve that goal. Thank you.
And John, I've been a real proponent about methodology from this point, or the point a little while back when this tuition and reserves got highlighted so much, that we need a methodology in everything we do in that arena, that we can't single one out, we can't delineate different groups, that we have to have an overall methodology that's in place and is consistent. So that's probably part of the reason, too, that you were looking at. As mentioned earlier, we have several new colleagues joining us around the table of the Board of Regents whose journey serving the UW system is just beginning. For others, their time of service, at least in this forum, is now ending, and that includes Regent President Brent Smith, Regent Jeffrey Bartell, Regent Katie Pointer, and Regent Mark Tyler. So at this meeting, we'd like to recognize their contributions, their commitments, and their good company. Saying farewell is never an easy thing, but the way I look at it is how lucky we are to know them, these people that are so hard to say goodbye to. This morning, we're going to recognize Regents Jeffrey Bartell and Mark Tyler. We will recognize Regent Smith and Pointer tomorrow. So to start things off, I'm going to call on Regent Walsh.
Thank you, President Falbo, and thank you for the opportunity to read this resolution of appreciation for Jeff Bartell. I'm especially pleased to do this. Jeff and I have been longtime friends. I'm especially pleased that the boss showed up, Angela, and that's good. We're hoping you'd come before this. A couple comments I want to make first, though. I've known Jeff Bartell for over 54 years. We first met when we were sophomores in high school. Now, 54 years, the only thing important about that is it just means we're as old as dirt. Jeff has had a long-time relationship with the University of Wisconsin system, and particularly the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He's a 1965 graduate of the university, undergraduate, with a degree in economics. Followed that in 1968 with a degree from the law school, and he's been very involved with the university. He's been a long-time participant and leader with the union directorate, Memorial Union. He was the president of the Alumni Association 1989, 1991. A number of occasions he taught at the law school, securities regulation. He had previously been the securities commissioner for 7 years for the state of Wisconsin. He taught in 82 and 86 and I believe 1992. And a lot of his work was culminated in 2006 when he was awarded the University of Wisconsin Distinguished Alumni Award. And that was especially, I think, important for him and his family. In 1978, his parents were awarded the same award. The reason I know that date is my mother was awarded the date, too, that date. But that's just not all what Jeff Bartell's done. He's been a real community leader, and I'm not going to list all the things he's done. But he served, for instance, 9 years on the Meriter Hospital Board, and that's why he was such an important member of the University of Wisconsin Hospital and Clinics Board. He is chair of the Wisconsin Association, the Wisconsin Foundation for Arts. He has been so since 1990. He's director and president of the Madison Repertory Theater. And, of course, he's had a successful legal career, being the partner in charge of 2 national law firms. And I think his greatest honor was that he received the Charles Goldberg Award, which is the highest award the State Bar Association Foundation gives for community service. And before I read this resolution, I also want to add thank you, Jeff, for, I think, something even more important, and that is for your patience and your thoughtfulness. And I remember when he first went on the board, he said, can't we communicate better? Can't we send our message? And I often heard him ask questions where he was looking for an answer, not seeking his own answer. Something we can all do a little better of, and if we, in these difficult times, that we have to do, because this is a complex organization. So it's my pleasure to read the resolution right now, and it is, whereas Jeff Bartell dedicated 7 years of exemplary service as a regent of the University of Wisconsin system from 2006 to 2013, and whereas Jeff made significant contributions to the university's long-term future as chair of the Capital Planning and Budget Committee throughout most of his term, helping to ensure that more than 180,000 UW students benefit from facilities that provide effective, safe learning and living environments. And whereas Jeff has been an active and thoughtful member of the Education Committee, through which he demonstrated his keen interest in increasing graduation rates and providing access to higher education in Wisconsin. And whereas Jeff has worked to publicly honor and reward the commitment of outstanding UW educators by serving on the Teaching Excellence Award Committee, praising these teachers' ability, quote, to kindle their students' curiosity and their desire to do more, end of quote. And whereas Jeff served as the Regents representative of the Higher Educational Aids Board, where he advocated for the importance of addressing students' financial need, and whereas Jeff served UW students, faculty, and staff in his role as Regent representative to the Hospital Authority Board and through his service on a number of board committees, including the Committee on Student Discipline and Other Student Appeals and the Personnel Matters Review Committee. And whereas Jeff is an accomplished alum of UW-Madison, where he earned his bachelor and law degrees, and in 2006 was recognized with the University of Wisconsin Distinguished Alumni Award. And whereas through service on 3 UW Chancellor Selection Committees for UW Colleges and Extensions, UW Eau Claire, and UW Parkside, Jeff helped to identify talented leaders to lead our institutions to even greater futures. And whereas Jeff enlivened many occasions by generously sharing his talent for, quote, tickling the ivories, end of quote, at all gatherings, fortunate enough to have a piano nearby, and thereby creating many, many memories for his colleagues of the camaraderie created by light musical touch. Be it therefore resolved that the Board of Regents and the University of Wisconsin system extends its most sincere gratitude to Regent Emeritus Jeffrey Bartell for his outstanding leadership and invaluable service to the UW system and the citizens of Wisconsin.
To David, you're much too kind, and I'm very pleased that my wonderful wife Angela was here to hear this today.
I'm so surprised.
Well, as David mentioned, we've known each other for a very long time. I think we met, as he said, when we were both sophomores at Madison West High School. We were both Madison West athletes, as a matter of fact. I was a point guard on the West High basketball team, and David wrestled, I think, at about 125 pounds. He was very light and wiry, but he was mean. So.
And he was mean.
And I remember that the basketballers and the wrestlers shared the boys' locker room at West High, and we saw each other fairly regularly. And I remember often seeing David in the locker room stepping on and off the scale to make sure that he was making his weight, because if he was 1 ounce over 125 pounds, he'd have to wrestle guys who were 10 or 15 pounds larger than he was. So that was a very important thing to make his weight. And more than once I saw him step off the scale with a curse and run over to the corner of the locker room and start spitting into a pail, trying to shed that last ounce. You could always peg the high school wrestlers because they really knew how to spit. And I think David probably still does, if you can ask him.
Anyway, I'm not going to take a lot of time with this. I've had the opportunity to talk with many of you about how much I admire the UW system and how enjoyable it has been to serve on this with outstanding group of board colleagues, how I'm in awe of the talents and dedication of the chancellors and the provosts and the campus administrators and faculty and staff and system staff, and how privileged I feel to have been allowed to serve on this board for the last 7 years. But I want to leave you with several random thoughts, that I feel strongly about. First of all, in my observation, the UW system, and particularly President Riley, in the last several months have been subjected to a level of legislative vitriol that I haven't seen in the decades that I've been watching this government and this university. It's been a perfect example, I think, of why it is that legislators should resist trying to get involved in the management of the University of Wisconsin system. With all due respect, most of them don't have the experience and the knowledge to be making governance decisions for this $5 billion a year enterprise with 40,000 employees and operations in every county throughout the state, with tens of thousands of sources of revenue, both public and private, and a complicated financial system. Now, I know that you need to have controls over this system, but I don't think legislators have the equipment to make those detailed decisions. But before they understood where the reserves came from, or what they were to be used for, or how they compared with reserves of other institutions, a number of them excoriated the UW, and for what I think many experienced financial managers would call prudent reserve ratios and business practices. And as we look at this in retrospect now, I think it is more and more apparent that this was not the huge deception that was painted at the time. Yes, it's our job as regents and as UW system administrators to educate and inform the legislature, our decision makers at the other end of State Street. And I think in this instance we did not do a good job of that. We failed in that job. But the notion that the UW should be punished both financially and with greater oversight because it had at a particular point in time reserves equal to about 90 days of its operations is just not appropriate, and I think it's grossly unfair, and to me it was very distressing. Second, in recent weeks and months, I have often been asked what is going to happen to the Board of Regents as more Republican regents are added and outnumber Democratic regents. And my response has always been that partisan politics does not prevail on this board. Although we often have disagreements about policy matters, about actions of the board, about how to deal with particular issues on various campuses, those discussions are not marked by discernible partisanship. That isn't to say that we all think about the same things about these matters, and if we did, most of us would be superfluous. But during my term on the board, I have observed that all of the regents, whether appointed by a Democrat or a Republican governor, have as their principal concerns, and sometimes very passionately,
the best interests of the UW and the people of Wisconsin and our students. And it's not a governor's agenda or a legislative faction's agenda. I saw an article recently, and some of you may have too, in which former Regent President Tony Markovich was quoted as saying pretty much the same thing that I've just said. As the token Democrat on an otherwise Republican-dominated Board of Regents, he was elected president. I hope my successor, Regent Farrell, and all of the new and ongoing members of the board will continue to exhibit what I've seen as that singularity of purpose. Well, finally, I want to thank all of you around this table for your friendship and support. You are some of the finest public servants that I've had the pleasure of knowing in my career. I want to thank President Riley and his extraordinary staff for their visionary leadership of the UW system. They have made serving as a regent challenging, rewarding, and really fun. And I want to thank the chancellors for their crucial guidance of their campuses. As all of the people around this table know, we have a cadre of chancellors much better than we have a right to expect with the salaries we are able to pay. And speaking of salaries, I want to thank the faculty and staff throughout the system for hanging in there in the face of stagnant wages and what they might perceive as a lack of appreciation for their extraordinary efforts to educate our students. I want them to know that all of us on the Board of Regents, all of you on the Board of Regents, admire their pedagogy and their loyalty. Well, I will end by observing that I'll really miss this board, and I'll miss seeing all of you on a regular basis. I'll miss the kind of discussion that I just heard the end of on the annual budget. Very exciting, very interesting. I've enjoyed virtually every moment of service on this board. And if you ever have a need for a piano player for a Regent retreat or to sit in with Joe Gow's band any place, I'm available. My best to all of you.
He's going to practice. Well, Jeff, as the token Republican that was appointed by a Democratic governor. That's right. Excuse me. 1.7 resolution of appreciation for Regent Mark Tyler's service on the Board of Regents. I would like to call on Regent Vasquez. Okay. Let me see if
Such fun.
We're stretching.
It's brunch. Good morning, everyone, and President Falvo, thank you for the opportunity to be the one that reads the resolution of appreciation to Mark. It has been a pleasure for me to have the opportunity to get to know Mark. When I was contacted and asked if I could do this, I immediately said yes. And there were three thoughts that came to my mind immediately, and they have stayed with me since I was asked. They are consummate professional, ambassador par excellence, and boundless energy. And that's what I think about Mark Tyler. And let me just say a little bit about each one of those. Mark, president, co-founder of OEM Fabrication, has really demonstrated how business can be challenged during difficult times, but yet can respond very appropriately. And I believe that under Mark's leadership, his company has continued to grow and continues to be strong. And I would believe that it is a model of, again, how manufacturing can be successful here in Wisconsin. But he has also gone beyond that, and that is that he really believes in getting business and education, both at the elementary and secondary level, and universities and colleges working together. And he has used this company to do that, to set up partnerships, relationships with those institutions. So Mark not only talks about it, but he actually does it. Ambassador is clearly another word that comes to mind when I think of Mark. And I saw that immediately because I met Mark when I was on the technical college board. And he came to the board and immediately started to take on responsibilities, but more so to actually visit the technical colleges and really be a very visible spokesperson for adult vocational technical education throughout the state. And I have also seen the same thing here when Mark joined the Board of Regents. Immediately came here and has made it a priority to visit as many of the campuses as he has and to really be a spokesperson. I've seen in Mark that individual that can really bridge those two systems and actually speak very positively of both technical education and university education. Boundless energy. I don't think I can keep up with Mark. He is unbelievably busy in his profession, busy in his ambassadorship role in making many visits throughout the state, being called upon by the governor, by the superintendent, by local community to be engaged in work groups, task groups, commissions. One of the other ways that I have the pleasure of knowing Mark is when he introduced me to someone, a nonprofit that he was involved in, and wanted that person and I to connect. Something that he did not have to do, but he went out and did that. The other thing that I find very interesting about Mark is he has a working farm, and he has ponies and horses. And so above and beyond everything that he does, then he goes home and is cleaning stalls and doing everything that he can to help his wife with her business in her horse farm business. So tremendous amount of energy that he has, but yet dedication to the boards and the commissions. Mark, as a result of that, has been recognized by the Wisconsin Technical College system, by the business community, by secondary education. So Mark, again, those three concepts, consummate professional, ambassador par excellence, and boundless energy, and it is my pleasure to read this resolution. Whereas S. Mark Tyler dedicated 2 years of exemplary service as a regent of the University of Wisconsin system from 2011 to 2013, and whereas Mark, who simultaneously served as president of the Wisconsin Technical College System Board, worked to enhance the partnership of those two nationally recognized public higher education systems, both of which are critical to developing a highly skilled 21st century workforce for the state. And whereas throughout his service as vice chair of the Education Committee, Mark helped maintain the high-quality academic programs for which UW institutions are known worldwide, and whereas Mark served on the new Research, Economic Development, and Innovative Committee, which seeks to leverage the many ways knowledge powers Wisconsin to build a stronger workforce, stronger businesses, and stronger communities. And whereas Mark has forged close ties with the UW River Falls campus, participating in that institution's Chancellor's Advisory Committee, and in 2012 being selected as its executive in residence by the College of Business and Economics, where he served with students' personal anecdotes from his successful business career. And whereas Mark has been a lifelong advocate of technical education and workforce preparedness, beginning his career with a design technology degree from St. Paul Technical Vocational Institute in Minnesota, and whereas Mark has recognized the important role played by academic staff in supporting student success, having served as chair of the Regent Selection Committee for the Academic Staff Excellence Awards, and has been in all areas a staunch advocate for advancing excellence within the UW system, be it therefore resolved that the Board of Regents of the University of Wisconsin System hereby commends Mark Tyler for his service to the UW system and outstanding commitment to higher education in Wisconsin. Mark?
Thank you, Jose. Some of you may know that Jose has been a mentor of mine for a number of years, and I've always kind of practiced having a personal board of directors, and fortunately I've got Jose in my group of advisors, so I really appreciate that. The last 2 years has really been an amazing journey for me. I've been completely impressed by our faculty, our staff, our students, from athletics to water. It's incredible what's going on across the university. Like the rest of the nation, I'll be watching as the UW leads the way in the flex degree and providing credentials for competence. As I leave the Regents, I can't help but wishing that I had a UW genie in a bottle, that I could get 3 wishes granted. If I had such a genie, those wishes would probably be something like this: to achieve seamless transitions between the technical college system and the UW and vice versa. I would really be incredibly gratified if we could overachieve the 30 credit mandate and do in excess of, say, 36. My second wish would be that every UW undergrad would have the opportunity to experience an experiential learning experience or an undergraduate research experience because of the incredible power that we've seen in these experiences. And third, that the UW system would follow the technical college's lead and not charge high school students for tuition. I know genies aren't real. I know relationships are. And I value each and every relationship that has been created over the last 2 years. So thank you very much.
Since we have these 3 new regents, we've become very efficient with our time. I'd like to throw out a proposal that we recess rather than adjourn and go into closed session, if you wish, to try and shorten up your Friday afternoon commitment. and do that with a working lunch. Is that, would you want to read a motion to that effect?
Okay.
It's a big part of your job now, Regina.
Caught her off guard.
Speak into the microphone. I move that the board go into closed session to, number one, consider personal histories related to the naming of facilities at UW-Madison as permitted by Section 19.85 Sub 1 Sub F, Wisconsin Stat. Number two, consider a UW-Madison salary adjustment as permitted by Section 19.85 Sub 1 Sub C, Wisconsin Stat 3. Confer with legal counsel regarding pending or potential litigation as permitted by Section 19.85 Sub 1 Sub G, Wisconsin Stat. And four, consider personnel evaluations and compensation as permitted by Section 19.85 Sub 1 Sub C, Wisconsin Stat.
Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call vote.
Regent Baling, Regent Bradley,
Yes.
Regent Drew,
Yes.
Regent Evers, Regent Salvo,
Yes.
Regent Farrow,
Yes.
Regent Higgins,
Yes?
Regent Rybar,
Yes.
Regent Menedee,
Yes.
Regent Milner,
Yes.
Regent Mueller, Regent Pointer,
Yes.
Regent Pruitt,
Yes.
Regent Roberts,
Yes.
Regent Tyler, Regent Vasquez,
Yes.
Regent Walsh,
Yes.
Regent Whitburn,
Yes.
16 yeses.
Then what we would like to do is, if it would take 5 minutes, grab a lunch, come back here. All our other guests, if you're having lunch with us, please grab a lunch and go up to the 19th floor, and we will reconvene here in an open meeting at 1 p.m.